In a time whenever every news source is telling you what is going on inside of United Methodism, I want to tell you what it actually means to be a United Methodist. I promise you that there is, in fact, a method to the madness. So we've been talking over the past several weeks about United Methodist distinctives, and it really all flows forth from grace. That's the central characteristic of Methodist theology, grace or unmerited kindness. It's the idea that God is gracious to us or kind to us, generous with us, merciful to us, loves us, even though there's nothing that we have done or could ever do to earn it or deserve it. Now, God's grace goes before us. This is how gracious that God is. God's grace goes before us and prepares us to meet God so that we're even ready to meet with God. And then God justifies us with His grace or makes us right with Him and gives us the assurance that we can, in fact, be in right relationship with Him. And guess what? Grace is not done there, but grace continues to work on us and in us and through us all the days of our lives until we become more and more Christ-like. That's grace. Everything flows forth from grace. But once you know that central United Methodist belief, then it becomes about doing it. It becomes about putting our faith into practice. And we've got this tried and true set of general rules that are almost 300 years old, but still speak to us today. So we began talking about these 2 weeks ago with the first one, which is to do no harm. Do nothing to harm yourself, others, or your relationship with God. Once we've first done no harm, then we're freed up to do other things, good things. In fact, to get into our second general rule, which is to do good. As co-founder of Methodism, John Wesley put it, do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. All right, so that's where we've been. Here's where we're going. We're getting into our third and final general rule today. Here's how it begins. In all of its 18th century goodness, it is expected of all who desire to continue in these societies. So this is the expectation that they should continue to evidence their desire of salvation. So we should show that we are wanting to be saved. We should prove it by how we live our lives. This preamble is no different than the preamble to the other two general rules. So how are we to show evidence of our desire for salvation? Well, thirdly, by attending upon all the ordinances of God, such are. So the ordinances of God. What in the world is an ordinance of God? I'm glad that you asked. And as the such are would indicate, John Wesley is about to list some of them out. So the first one is the public worship of God. And guess what? You're here. So check mark to that one. Great job getting here today. All right. Now, if you need some encouragement to stay connected, to stay plugged in, to stay engaged today, and to continue coming back next time and the time after that, I turn to this verse from Hebrews. Don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near. I think that's a good piece of encouragement. Let's leave that up there for a moment. About 4 years ago, the way that we gather together changed, really overnight. In March of 2020. You see, I think that all of us as church leaders knew that we needed to have online worship as an option. And then, even though there were very few who were actually doing it, some mega churches out there, and even though we all knew that we needed to find a way to do it, none of us made time to find a way to do it until we had to find a way to do it. And then all of a sudden, it was like we all figured it out in about a week's time. And so now gathering together can look different. I used to be able to say, if you're not sick, not working, not away, or not without a ride, I want you here. Like every Sunday, like don't take one off, like be here all of the time as long as you're not sick, not away, not without a ride, and not working. Now today, things are different. People can join us from online. Hello, we're glad you're here. There are people who are right now working in the nursery who will tell me, oh, yeah, I watch the service every Monday morning. Things are completely open to us now, and yet, even so, I want you here as much as possible. For those for whom online is the only option, then I am so glad that it's here for you. It counts. I'm going to say that again. Online worship counts. But if you have a way to get here with us, then by all means do so, because the verse doesn't simply say, don't stop worshiping God, but don't stop meeting together with other believers. And so if you need online worship, be sure to say hello in the comments, say hello in the chat, encourage each other there. But otherwise, we need to be with each other so that we can encourage each other. Don't get out of that particular habit. Once you are here together, you are going to hear the next general rule, participate in it, which is the ministry of the word, either read or expounded. Again, you heard John read earlier. I just talked a little bit about that verse from Hebrews, so I would say check mark again. We're going to talk a lot more about this one next week in terms of how Methodists think, but for right now, it might be enough to say that this is our foundation. This is where it all flows forth from the ministry of the word, either read or expounded. What you're going to find whenever you read it and hear it expounded, that you're going to be encouraged to participate in the next general rule, which is the supper of the Lord. Actually, this is not another general rule, but again, one of those ordinances. So the supper of the Lord, guess what? It's the first Sunday of the month, intentionally scheduled so that this third rule would line up with this, so you can participate in this one as well. Whether you call it the supper of the Lord, communion, the Mass, the Eucharist, it all means the same thing. It's eating some bread and drinking some, in our case, since we're Methodist, grape juice, and believing that Jesus really shows up and is really present here with us. Look, I don't expect you to shed tears during the message, maybe unless it's particularly bad. You might shed some tears during a very powerfully moving song, but what I do expect every time that we participate in the supper of the Lord is to see tears. And I think it's because people are understanding that they are receiving Christ as sinful as we might be. All right, something else that we've participated in today is the next ordinance that Wesley lists out, which is family and private prayer. Notice the distinction of both family and private. So there are corporate aspects of our prayer life, but don't let it stop there. There are also private aspects of our prayer life, prayers that we say on our own. It's not enough to just wait until the next time you can gather together in the fellowship of other believers, but we need to be praying constantly, no matter what we're doing throughout our daily lives as individuals and as groups as well. Some people tell me, I don't know how to pray. To them I say, well, just pray the Lord's Prayer, because Jesus says pray like this, and then he praise like that. So that's always a great model and a great basis of where to begin whenever we don't know what else to pray. All right, something else that's going to feel like deja vu is the next ordinance, which is searching the Scriptures. I know we just talked about the ministry of the Word, both read and expounded, but here we are with searching the Scriptures, and it should feel like deja vu because of that. Now, this one I think about something that can be done more on our own. Whenever we talk about the ministry of the Word, read and expounded, what we're talking about is the public reading of Scripture, and also, in addition to that, hearing it talked about by others. But whenever we talk about searching the Scriptures, this is something that we're each called to do as we go deeper. Look, it's not enough to hear maybe like one longer passage and maybe a couple other verses here and there to hear just me talk about them. You should read it for yourself. You should open up that book. You should pour into it. You should read more and more and more of it. And as you do, you'll go from seeing the letter of the law to seeing the spirit of the law as you see a full picture of who God is and what God wants for us as you go deeper and deeper and deeper and keep searching and searching and searching. All right, again, if you search the Scriptures, what you're going to find is a call to our next ordinance, which is fasting or abstinence. Now, both of these words mean essentially the same thing. They essentially mean giving something up for a time or forever. Now, whenever we make a distinction, we might say that fasting is for food and abstinence is really for anything else. But again, the two words can be used interchangeably. This is really an untapped spiritual discipline for many of us. Many of us think that it's not for our particular faith, and so we don't participate in this one, but it's an opportunity for us. A new spiritual discipline for many of us as we don't do a lot of fasting. It's really a Protestant issue that we've kind of set this one aside. So it's an option for you there to try out, to try this one on, and to see how your relationship with God develops and deepens as you give certain things up. Look, it's not about being miserable, but rather it's about showing that we aren't dependent upon those things, but rather we are dependent upon God. And it's about freeing up our time to pour into these other ordinances, the ones that we've listed out. So I think you understand now what an ordinance is. Essentially, they're these practices that are meant to lead us somewhere. Maybe a better question to ask is, what are the practices that help us to cultivate a loving relationship with God? What are the things that we can do that will deepen our relationship with God? Not practices that we do for the sake of practicing, but rather practices that lead us, guide us to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Methodist theologian Kevin Watson summarizes this general rule like this. He says to practice the Christian disciplines instead of using the word ordinances. There's another very common way, a modern way of paraphrasing this final general rule. Bishop Reuben Job said, "Stay in love with God." In fact, his work on the three general rules became so influential that most people, whenever they are quoting the general rules, will say that they are to do no harm, to do good, and to stay in love with God. Some people will even say that Wesley said, do no harm, do good, stay in love with God. Wesley didn't quite say that. He said, attend to the ordinances of God, but again, Bishop Job's words have been just so influential. All right, look, if he's able to take a crack at getting down to what Wesley was getting at, might I be so bold as to try myself? I would say that this could be summarized as, well, it's already up there, so you know it, do life with God. Look, Job had the end in mind. Wesley had the means in mind. We do the spiritual disciplines, we do the ordinances so that we get brought into a loving relationship with God, so that that relationship is deepened. It's no different than any of our other relationships. Our relationships are built upon choosing each other 100 times, 1,000 times in a day. And so if you're a person who can stay motivated by just keeping a goal in mind, then use the words of Bishop Job. They're beautiful words of staying in love with God. But if you're a more practical person who needs to make a list if you want to accomplish a goal and needs to focus on those lead measures rather than those lag measures, then I would say do life with God. Live your life in such a way that you are constantly connected with God. Look, if you pour into any of your other relationships, you will either deepen in love with that other person or you'll grow apart. Now, in the case of a loving God, of a benevolent God, you will grow in greater love with God as you do life with God. As we come to the conclusion of our talk on the general rules, I want to note that my greatest problem with the general rules is not in the rules themselves. They are great rules that are still very, very applicable to us today. You might have noticed that I only read the list for the third rule, not the first one. Some of the ways that Wesley sought to put these into practice about 300 years ago in 18th century England aren't as translatable to 21st century America, but the rules themselves are good. My issue isn't with the rules. My issue is with the order. Because if we do life with God, then we should be able to move into the other ones, which, as a reminder, are first, do no harm, and secondly, to do good. But it's really because we are doing life with God that everything else is flowing forth and that we are able to do no harm and do good. It's all because we are doing life with God that all of those other things flow forth. Whenever we do life with God, we don't want to harm anyone else. Whenever we do life with God, we want to do good for others. It's just the natural outflowing of a deep, personal, intimate relationship with God. All right, so that's a little bit about the method to the madness that is Methodism, specifically in how we put it into practice. But I'll leave you with a final thought. As you pour into your relationship with God, I think that you'll find that the lyric that Taylor Swift sang to Post Malone in her latest duet with him, I love you, it's ruining my life, that might be true of other relationships, but as you pour into your relationship with God, this is not going to be the case. The more you say, I love you to God, the more your life is actually going to get better. It doesn't always get easier. It doesn't always get simpler, but it does, in fact, get better.